All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Michelle December, and I'm the Chief Program Officer here at the Aspen Art Museum. Welcome to our last Legacy Lecture. This is the fourth in a series of Legacy talks where we've invited important figures who have shaped our local, state, and national art scene, and we are so excited to end with someone who's in the process of ending something himself. So I'm sure we'll hear all about it tonight. Tonight's speaker is Adam Lerner. He has a very impressive resume that I'll make sure I walk through. He's the outgoing director and chief animator of the Museum of Contemporary Art, Denver. He's a former master teacher for modern and contemporary art at the Denver Art Museum, founder and former executive director of Denver's The Laboratory of Art and Ideas at Belmar, and has had which I think is probably the most impressive part of his resume, has had a career devoted to being very thought-provoking with a deep sense of humor. So the format for tonight's lecture will be Adam will give us a talk, and then we'll have questions and answers to follow. Our gratitude goes to the Questrom Education Fund and the Laffey-McHugh Foundation for making this program free. Please join me in welcoming Adam.
Thank you. I feel like I shouldn't have to use this, but I guess you need it, right? So he was like, I could see his like terror in his face when I said that, so we're good. I feel, I have to admit, well, first of all, I want to say I feel a great gratitude to Michelle and to the Aspen Art Museum. It's really an honor to be speaking in this building again, and to you for coming out on this really beautiful day. Thank you, and hopefully we can have some nice question and answer later. What I did want to say was that I do feel a little uncomfortable talking about my legacy, right, which feels a little bit like you're giving your own obituary, right? What I'm going to do, though, is I jotted down some things that I feel like I've done, and I'll give you sort of what I feel like I've done, and then you can like take any of it that you want as your legacy. How about that? As my legacy. You could just sort of, instead of me having to figure out what it is that I want to leave behind. So I'm going to start with this. I think I did something right. And I say that because of a few signs. Like the first sort of, like, and this is a sort of a nice indicator of the feeling that I've done something right. The fact that here's people like lined up all down the block, and that actually happens quite frequently at our openings. And these are artists that, you know, people like Adam Pendleton and Guido Ignati. Well, one of them might have been Molly Bounds, who's actually here in our audience. Well, but most of the people who we are exhibiting are people that maybe 1% of our audience has heard of. And the fact that actually people line up down the street for an opening suggests that of an artist that they've never heard of, suggests to me that we've somehow captured their hearts and minds, so that they trust us. They feel like, oh, there's something that these guys are doing that we want to be a part of, and we believe that it's going to be interesting, meaningful, and probably fun. And so I feel like anecdotally, that's like one of the most interesting things that indicates like having done something right. Like other anecdotal elements of it, the fact that the biggest category of visitor for us is the 25 to 34-year-old. So that's actually most of our visitors are under the age of 44, but the highest category is that age group, and then the next highest is the 18 to 25-year-olds. So it suggests to me something also that we're doing, that we've actually managed to figure out how to get a very, very difficult audience for museums to get. It's usually a challenge to get that next generation of cultural veterans to come, although I see lots of you guys there, here. But as a mass audience, it says a lot. And the fact is that that's been the core of our audience increase. Is we've almost tripled our visitation from 2014 to today. So those things suggest that there's something that we're doing right. And that's probably the most statty I'll get with you today. Mostly what I'm going to talk about is the things that I've done that are a lot more qualitative. And I'm going to start with this, is I think I had one good idea. Before this idea, people would say like, he's smart. But after this, like, people were like, he's a genius. You know, like people would say like, you know, I'm not, by the way, but they would say that, and I didn't correct them. You know. This is the thing that in the New York Times did a profile on me, like this is what they focused on when like people say like, oh, this is Adam Lerner, this is the kind of thing he does. Like, there's one thing they talk about, it's this. And it was in 2005 or so, I developed a lecture series where instead of having one speaker come and talk about one subject, we would have two speakers speak on completely unrelated subjects. So we would have like one speaker speak about Andy Warhol, the second speaker speak about artificial lighting, and then we'd have question and answer on both at the same time. And so this is the thing that sort of propelled me. I was basically working I did this at the organization I worked at beforehand, the lab at Belmar. The lab was a sort of alternative art space in a shopping district. And we started off in unleased retail spaces, and there were like 10 people in the audience, and most of them were my friends. This is like the first day we did this. And then like, you know, here's one which was someone speaking about T.S. Eliot, and then someone speaking about fresh meat sausage. And we had, but by the second week, we had to move up to like, there were like 20 people there, and the third week, there were like 30 or 40 people. And meanwhile, we're showing major exhibitions of contemporary art, like we're showing Isaac Julian's Fantôme Afrique that we co-produced. But these programs were kind of at the core of this community that we were creating. And so by like the 5th, 6th, 7th week, we get 80, 90, 100 people showing up, and we had to keep on moving into bigger and bigger spaces. Here's a sample season, would be carnivorous plants and color field painting, earth art and goat cheese, capoeira and Le Corbusier, Chinese opera and Alfred Hitchcock, Walt Whitman and whole hog cooking. Like these are paired this way because they would like sound good next to each other. Tequila and dark energy in the universe. Soul food and existentialism. Prairie dogs and Gertrude Stein. And then the summer blockbuster was Marxism and kittens, kittens, kittens. And so I say that I had like one good idea, and I really do think that this was my one good idea, but I would also want to say that everything that I think I've done that's been interesting since then, I've learned ultimately from that one idea. Like it's basically been the core of my approach to how I'm museumed. It's I do everything in a way that can be both sort of sophisticated and also non-pretentious. Find a way to both have the most interesting kind of programming that I can develop and also undermine any sense of status that anybody wants to claim for being associated with that programming. And like, there's no way that you can sort of claim any kind of superiority when you're going to a lecture on kittens, 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 right? Even though these are very serious lectures, right? You have like a philosophy professor talking about Marxism, and you have like an animal husbandry expert talking about like the domestication of cats. But still, there's something that's playful about it. And so I continually learned from what I did. And then for me, then, the audience sort of followed from there. And we'd have hundreds of people coming to this program, and we did it for many years, even still starting to get hundreds of people each night. That's the first thing. So even though these would be popular programming that I would do, and I talked a little bit about audience, I tried not to listen to my audience. And this is actually, I love them. I love them to death, and I love you guys. But I try not to sort of do what my audience wanted me to do. And let me give you a story before I sound like a real jerk. So the organization that I started off with that I founded was called The Lab. As I mentioned, Art and Ideas. And this is the first logo that I had for it. And, you know, this is like the sort of sans serif logo looks like it could be like for an art institution in Zurich or someplace fancy, and it's like I knew the rules of how to look very contemporary arty, and we showed exhibitions that were, as I mentioned, like Isaac Julian's Fantôme Afrique or Fang Lijun, and then after the success of programs like Mixed Taste, when I was starting to realize that there's something more interesting when you can not always try to prove how elevated you are, but actually undermine how elevated you are while still being serious, if you follow me on that. So that became more interesting to me. So you guys, if anyone has a company here that's ever gone through a process of developing a logo, then you know how long it takes to put that identity building process. So after finishing that entire identity building process for the first logo, I then went back and said, like 6 months later, I said, no, that logo is terrible. Like we're called the Lab. That's like our title. So like let's have our logo be a Labrador Retriever. That would be hilarious. And so this was the logo that I really wanted, and I love this. I loved it, and there was a whole series of them actually. Like the Lab is smart. The dog's drinking out of a toilet. The Lab makes friends, and then get to know the Lab, and so what I did was I had come from the Denver Art Museum, as Michelle mentioned, and there you learn that you're supposed to have like focus groups. There you learn that you're supposed to listen to your audience, and so that's like the orthodoxy of like that's what's supposed to be the reformist orthodoxy of museums, and so I was like, well, and I guess partly because I came from the Denver Art Museum beforehand, and partly because I was actually scared about launching a very serious contemporary art institution, like launching it from scratch. Like I have no track record. I was before like a second-tier educator in a museum. Like I had no status, and I was launching an institution that was showing international artists, and here I am, like asking these people who are showing in these Kunsthalles in Zurich and all over, like to show at a place that has a dog as its logo. And so I was a little bit nervous, I admit, and therefore that probably explains why I put together 2 focus groups. And these are people who all loved the programming, or people who just attended the programming, but nevertheless they were all people who knew us and who liked what we did, who sort of were followers to some level. And everybody in both focus groups said, do not do this. Do not use this logo. They say, first of all, people will think you're a vet, and people won't understand it. And besides, it's kind of weird, and no one took you seriously. And they said these things, and then I was really heartbroken, just watching the videotapes of these sessions. I was not the one who was asking. I was actually just watching on video, but I said, you know what? Screw it. I love this logo. I'm going to use it. And you know what happened is that I launched it, and then everybody else loved it too. People were like, "Oh my God, you've got to go to this place called the Lab. Their logo is this dog because it's a lab, Labrador." And that people talked about, and people just it was people were wearing T-shirts all over town, with this on it. And I learned a very, very important lesson at that moment. Which is that you can't ask other people for permission to take a risk, right? I felt insecure, and I needed some sort of boost because I didn't have anybody. I was just doing it by myself, and I thought I could ask the audience to give me a little bit of backing. But actually they were protecting me. That's almost their job. That's what they're meant to do. And therefore, if I wanted to do something courageous, I needed to find that ability myself. And then those are the only 2 examples I give you from before I came to the MCA. But my first exhibition at the MCA really highlighted it for me. The fact that I tried to learn from artists. My first exhibition I curated was Barnaby Furness, who paints these just absolutely majestic drip paintings. And you see the sort of power of an image like this to really just overwhelm a space and to create this enormous sense of tranquility for the viewer. But I watched actually Barnaby make this painting because he made it in the gallery, and there he was. And something very, very striking occurred to me as I sensed the energy as I watched him make this painting that felt completely different from the energy of the actual finished painting. Like here, you sort of feel the courage it takes. You feel the sort of risk-taking. You feel the sort of like the chaos, the element of chaos, in the sense of the unpredictable in the work, which is the reason why going to an artist studio is always so like fun and energizing, right? And then there's something very different that happens when the work arrives in its finished form. It's a different energy that it has. It's all of that chaos has now been subsumed into the finished work that becomes a work. And I realized that I wanted both. Like I wanted to have both the energy of presence that is, art, but also, which is usually, by the way, the energy that's proper to an art museum. But I wanted also the energy that happens when you're in like a place of making, like an artist studio or some alternative art spaces. And so everything I did at the museum like tries to have both. It tries to sort of have the conventions of art, but also I tried to always allow a little bit of chaos into the museum, because that's where the energy of that's where you feel just a little bit more awake. You feel like you can make the world as well yourself. That's when you feel like excited about art, when things have that feeling of being a little bit still unformed. And so I wanted to learn from artists how to be more like them in terms of like how to myself demonstrate courage in the way that the artists do. And I wanted to create a space that actually showed that. And I wanted the museum to be an exemplar of that. Like I wanted us to sort of say, okay, we will model for you what it means to be creative. Because usually what happens with museums is that the museum just has a little bit of an arm's distance to the creativity. Like the museum is the platform and the artist is the risk taker on that platform. But the platform is relatively safe, right? The platform is, okay, we have one artist, then we have another artist. And there's no real skin in the game for the museum during an exhibition. I mean, there is, of course, sometimes when there's a controversy, yes, it bleeds to the museum. But I want to be myself part of doing what artists do. Because I would always say like, oh, we learn from this artist. I would always say that. That's what educators say. And I'm kind of an educator at heart. We learn from this artist. Like we learn from Andy Warhol. Art and life are the same. But I didn't really learn from Andy Warhol. I didn't actually do anything differently because I saw Andy Warhol. I just said that. It's kind of nonsense. But I would just say that. I wanted to actually try to do that myself. So one of the things I did was I listened to weirdos. I listened to actually, and I would say I listened to like, or at least oddballs, maybe not weirdos, oddballs. I tried to take a meeting once every couple of weeks with somebody who I have no idea who they are, who just like for whatever reason they approach me and they've got some crazy thing some crazy idea. And I don't know, I think it's interesting to do that. And once I did that and some guy called me and he said he has these Malevich paintings he wants to show me. And I'm like, great. Now, for those of you who don't know Malevich, they look a lot like this. I think the last time a major Malevich went up for auction, it was about a $60 million sort of sale. And this guy says he has 180 paintings, not all Malevich, but many of them are Malevich. But he bought them off of eBay. And he bought them off of a guy who was a mid-level insurance administrator in Aachen, Germany. And would I like to see these paintings? So I'm like, yeah, of course. And so he brought 2 paintings in, and they were amazing. I loved these works. I don't know exactly who painted this painting or why or when, but it looks incredible. This looks identical to a Rodchenko. And so I gave an exhibition to this guy's collection of 180 works. One room looked like the Museum of Modern Art, and then the next gallery showed just the breadth of the rest of the collection. And the question it raises is what does it mean when we talk about authenticity? Right? Because these are all unauthenticated paintings, right? If they were authentic, they would be a major exhibition that would take 10 years to organize. This took like 6 months to organize, and it took like a U-Haul truck to bring them over there. But from the store, he keeps them in a vault in a bank. But I think the question that it raises when you look at these works that have this incredible power is, does it matter whether this was painted by the hand of a master? And in fact, the way it triggers the mind to not know who painted this, because these kind of like fell off a bus, and fell off a truck. Because you don't know, then actually you have a much more sort of uneasy and therefore like intriguing and powerful relationship to these stunning objects. Some artists from New York, they saw this exhibition, convinced the publisher to get me to write a book about it, and so I did, called From Russia with Doubt, and somebody thought it was #1. I also, related to this, this was pretty terrifying to me. In general, I tried to do things that frightened me. So, that's, ever since Mixed Taste, I would say that the most interesting things I've done are things that I felt like fear doing. There are a lot of things I've done that I didn't feel fear, but the most interesting things, I felt fear. And one example of that was this exhibition of Mark Mothersbaugh. And I had met Mark Mothersbaugh, had a short conversation with him, and thought he was one of the most interesting people I'd ever met, and someone whose story had not been told. For those people who don't know Mark Mothersbaugh, you might know this band, Devo. They usually wear funny red hats, whip it good, Anyway, he was the front man for the band Devo, and he created this band as an art project, as part of a bigger art project that relates to film, design, all of that. And he was an artist before Devo, and then he continued to make art after Devo. And I took about 20 trips to LA to see his art, which all has this sense of play. He's obsessed with symmetries. He has a sort of interest in this sort of childlike approach to the world, as you see like in these roly-poly figures. He makes outrageous musical instruments. Most of all, during the 4 years or so of working on the exhibition, I went to see 30,000 drawings that he had created over the course of his lifetime, and then I exhibited them in the whole museum. But I would want to say that before I exhibited this work, right before the opening day of the exhibition, I was still terrified that I had exhibited an artist that might be like completely ridiculous, like that, because I was completely on my own. No other museum curator had ever exhibited him at all, let alone giving him an entire retrospective. I gave him a retrospective, but he'd never had a spective, right? I was out there on my own, and it's not. And I wish I could say like, oh yeah, I knew immediately this is a total like gem. This guy is like he's it, and I wish I could say I had that kind of confidence. Up until like the night of the exhibition, as I was walking around the exhibition and saying, wow, this guy is really, really interesting. It was after I wrote the book and all, but still, I really felt it. Then I felt like, oh yeah, this is like legitimate. But, and then 6 other museums ended up taking the exhibition, and it ended up being, you know, like legitimized by the field after I took that chance. You know, I mean, what happens is that there's such a strong tendency in my field to triangulate. You know, what a curator will do is they'll find an artist who's been recognized just enough by somebody who they respect so that they won't have to really put any skin in the game for themselves. They won't have to really take any chances. But they haven't been recognized so much so they can actually get the credit for actually kind of launching this person, right? That kind of like, and they're always triangulating that way, right? And because you're basically protecting yourself always. And I know that tendency myself, right? I know that, I feel that sometimes. And I also, like, gotta say, the most interesting things I've done, I think, are the ones where I've felt like, I feel like this person is, you know, one of the most creative forces in American culture the last 40 years. I believe in this, but I'm also scared. It's like my littlest dog, Kingsley. Like, she like really, really wants to be pet, but she's like always really, really scared. Like, that's how I feel about these projects that really interest me, and yet also terrify me. And those are precisely the things that I seek. That's what I felt about mixed taste. When I first did mixed taste, I took all of my colleagues off of the mailing list, because I would have thought, oh, these people will think I've just gone soft. I took my advisor, my graduate school friends off, you know, and like, you know, and I feel like, to me, like, the story of my career is a story of like being scared and like walking into it. That just happened even recently, and then it started to become a thing that I actually seek. Oh, that doesn't seem interesting to me because I'm not scared of that at all. And so, like, even the last exhibition I did, my last exhibition at the museum, was another artist who I was in Tulum in a yoga class, and I saw somebody with a tattoo that was like the most interesting tattoo I'd ever seen. And I was like, wow, like, who did that? And he's like, well, this person named Amanda Wakub, and I wrote that down, Amanda Wakub. Okay, wow, that's really interesting. And I went home, I researched her, and it's like, she like kind of pioneered this style of tattoo making. That's sort of, and I learned that she actually like learned that from her own interest in studying abstraction, and then she also like sees herself as just an artist in general. And she made these tattoos by asking herself the question, what would abstraction look like if it was made for bodies and not for rectilinear sheets, you know, or canvases, rectilinear surfaces? And so she's really thinking like every other contemporary artist I know, but yet she hasn't been recognized by any other curator for a museum exhibition. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And, you know, and these are, by the way, these are the kind of works that she makes for the gallery. They're incredible, absolutely beautiful works, and she makes them all using tattoo ink. And again, it was like literally until the night before the exhibition opened, I felt terrified that, like, oh my God, maybe this is nothing and not something. And then after it's up, and I could see how it looks, I'm like, wow, okay, this is something. I believe this is something. So one thing I also feel really proud of is I killed my one good idea. And like the one thing that I think is like, you know, the most maybe creative thing I've ever done is, or at least the most creative thing I've ever done with Mixed Taste, is I took that, Mixed Taste was getting like hundreds of people a night to come to it like 10 years after it had been launched. And hundreds of people, it would sell out 5 weeks in advance. Of course, you know, like, no longer has like anyone under the age of 50 going, because like what self-respecting 25-year-old would plan 5 weeks in advance, right? And so Mixed Taste was like chugging along, huge audience, people love it, like totally loyal. People would go 8 times a summer to this lecture, and then I thought, you know what, time to just kill this baby. And so we stopped doing Mixed Taste, and we gave it to the theater center, the Denver Center, Off Center, And now they run the program there at the theater, and it's no longer an MCA program, but good, those people who are the loyal audience, let them do it, but it's no longer us. And I feel like, to us, it was really important to say, like, there's more important things than doing something popular. You could do something, like, this, if it's no longer interesting, then what does it matter that it's popular? And it's looking at the long term, like what I really care about is doing things that are interesting. So ultimately, it's about having a creative voice. It's the idea of not just being that neutral platform for the artist to be the creative voice, it's about developing a voice. And so, like, art fitness training is where it sort of started. When I did this program for the Denver Art Museum and I worked there, it was called like something like Looking at Art, or something like that. And basically, this is a workshop on training yourself on how to exercise the skills of looking at art. But the language of it is all self-mockery. Feel more confident at Art Museum, and these silly little 50s guys. And Feminco is a program that we ran, which is a spin-off of Mixed Taste, where we would have, like, what's more chaos in the gallery than allowing roller girls to do demonstrations there as part of a program on women in power, where we have also women politicians speaking. Or programs like Art Meets Beast, where we have like a craft butcher actually butcher a carcass in the gallery. And I feel like programming does allow the museum an opportunity, public program, to really express a unique voice, because you can distinguish it from the voice of the artist, because it's the museum voice. It really became an expression of our identity. And that's, I think, something that, I'm not going to say what my legacy is. It's for you to say what my legacy is, but I would offer that as something that's interesting, is the idea of inventing ways of expressing the voice of the museum through various kinds of programs. Like, this is a new program we call it 3 Things, Any 3 Things, where we kind of, the word education doesn't even quite fit for it, because there's lectures, yes, but there's also performances, it's creative, it's everything. It's learning, but it's also entertainment, and it's, there's no name for it, so whatever. So through the language of programming came also the sort of just the innovation in the language that we speak, because I think that museums have a tendency towards this very neutral tone, like this kind of museum-y talk. So again, that's part of being a neutral platform. And so, like, for example, like, I developed this program called Museum Quality Drinking. By the way, I'm a vegetarian and I don't drink, but I really believe in like the idea of creating a little bit of chaos in the museum, and I think that, and also thinking about the museum as a place where you enter into people's hearts and minds, and you do that, you imprint on them because you create these events for them in their lives. So it also has this element of self-mockery and being a little bit bad, like, for example, the Triple Xmas Craft Fair, where people make erotic holiday gifts, which is, has 300 or 400 people show up to it now. And this began even back at the lab, where our motto was, because culture is big, like Canada. But that kind of like humor in our talk is something we still do regularly. Our programs now, we have tours led by comedians called Shit Talk Tours, and this then became like part of the DNA of the museum, so that our social media person, who's wonderful, Kelly O'Henenberry, will create like Instagram posts like this. We dare you to stand in front of any work in Tara Donovan's Fieldbook exhibition and not say, holy fuck. And or like this one, like, we're closed for installation now through June 7th, but here's a cute picture of a dog. And what we're basically saying is, I think that the reason that museums tend to use this sort of sans serif type and try to take themselves very seriously is they so much want people to take them seriously. To actually, people, they want to demonstrate their own like status as adjudicators of taste. And And what we're saying is actually there's other ways of demonstrating your smarts, right? Like your humor can demonstrate your smarts actually just as much. And so that's why we use that. And also, like it doesn't help. It doesn't in any way diminish from the quality of your programming to speak in this self-deprecating tone. And maybe it has something to do with the fact that why we're able to get this sort of 25 to 34-year-old audience for us. So ultimately, it comes down to this. I try to make the museum awesome. And I tried to make the museum awesome. I have to get used to speaking in the past tense, right? Sorry. And I mean that, by the way, very seriously, like very specifically when I use the term awesome. Because I believe that museums are very good at excellence, right? And we try for excellence too, right? We co-organized the major retrospective of Marilyn Minter. We organized Tara Donovan's retrospective. These are some of the most serious artists working in the field of contemporary art. We've generated there's 20 pounds of books that by weight. That's a lot, in the last 10 years. These are all books that we published or co-published, including 2 peer-reviewed publications. Now, nobody does peer-reviewed publications. These are publications that will be taught in university classrooms for graduate schools. I mean, this is we believe in the intellectual content of what we do. And so therefore, we do care about excellence. I mean, we started a program very recently where we lend art to our visitors. So therefore, we commission artists to make works, and then we lend it to our visitors for free for up to a year, so kind of like an art library. We have a teen program where we have 12,000 teens come through the museum every year, most of them coming on their own. We have $20,000 of scholarships for teenagers to go to college, people who are willing to demonstrate a willingness to fail. I think all of that demonstrates for me in the category of excellence. Right? That's sort of what a museum should do. That's examples of things like best practices. But I think there's something different when you get to awesome. And when you get to awesome, it's like when we do things like gags. So for example, we gave away 2 free tickets to the King Tut exhibition at the Denver Art Museum. And all the people had to do was redeem these 2 used tires for their tickets. We didn't tell the Denver Art Museum about this, and that to me felt kind of awesome, right? And that's what makes people feel like there's something going on there. By the way, this was not a program that had any legs to it. It didn't really work, but it was fun, and people kind of sensed that. The staff wanted to bring a camel into the museum for the holiday video. We brought a camel into the museum. Nick, my exhibition manager, wanted to give a tour of the Mother's Ball exhibition wearing his bunny suit, so he gave the exhibition in his bunny suit. To me, one thing I always tell my staff is saying excellence for us is a baseline. We need to be excellent to be a museum, but we need awesomeness too. We need beyond just excellent. And I said, if we're always just professional, then we're never human. Right? Because why do we even have art if we can't learn from artists how to break rules, right? And do things outside of convention, give people things that are unexpected. And for a museum, that's what it feels like. And I think that for me, I'm very specific when I say it's awesome, because for me being awesome is doing something that's palpable, that feels bodily, that feels like it feels emotional in a way that's different from just that was a really excellent this or that. That makes people love you. And that's actually the reason why when my metrics for my board, the number 1 metric every board meeting we talk about is love. It's what is the love? And we do various, and we all say, we joke, social media is a proxy for love. It kind of works that way, right? Because what is the relationship people have with us when they're not visiting? How much have we imprinted into their hearts and minds? Have we changed what it feels like to live in this city because we are here? And that's actually, I think that that maybe if I have a legacy, it's to like get us a little bit away from those traditional standards of how we think about what matters for an art museum. And hopefully it's more towards the softer side. And that's it.
I can't resist. Thank you very much for coming up here. Sure. Did I hear Michelle correctly that you're leaving MCA?
Yes, I'm leaving after 10 years.
Where are you going?
I don't know.
I find it wickedly and beautifully humorous and ironic that you've come to an institution here in Aspen, Colorado, liberal hotbed of the world, that has one of the most serious art institutions totally devoid of what you brought to the MCA, and that's a sense of humor. Oh. And I totally love what you're doing down there. Oh. It's such a delight. It brings life to art. I wish we could get a little bit more of that here. Oh, well. Enough of my political statement.
Well, you're very, very kind to say that. Thank you. And I got to say, like, I don't recommend what I do necessarily for anybody else. I'm really saying, that's also why I'm saying it's like, I don't want to like leave this. I say this is what I had, and this is what the language that we used to do what we do, and it might not work in every place or for every. It might not be. What the idea is, the most important thing is it has to be authentic. It has to come from authentically from within the organization. And I think that, but I do think that every organization needs to find their own elements of chaos, right? Find their own element of personality, of humanness, and that's, I think, really that's what's important. And the reason I'm leaving the museum is I feel like I've done what I can do there. Like I feel like I really love my job, and I'm sad to leave it. But I also know that it is time to but the next interesting thing I have in me is not going to be from the seat of that office, and therefore I need to move on. But I appreciate that very much. It's very nice of you to say that. Thank you. Thank you.
I have one here.
Okay.
Could you tell us about your relationship with your board?
Oh yeah, sure.
And how that evolved over time?
Yeah, I have, okay, I'm happy to talk about my relationship with my board. You know, I feel like when I first joined the board, when I first came to the museum in 2009, even though I thought, oh, everybody loves me, they aren't I adored? In fact, I think that about a third of the board loved me and got me. And then maybe a third of the board thought that I had some clever techniques for getting audiences, but they were generally not all entirely comfortable with, everything I did, but they saw it as useful to get audiences to show up because they thought it built energy for what really mattered, which was the serious exhibitions. And then I think a third of the board was downright suspicious of this. And in fact, the press, there were 2 art critics in town, and one of them attacked me, head on, insults, this is going to ruin the museum. And that made some board members nervous. I don't know, my first move as director was to ask the board chair, can I have the title Director and Chief Animator? And he said, no. And I well, this is why I believe I want to be an animator, is that I think the curator cares for art. That's the role of a curator. And for me, I want to animate art. I want to bring it to life for people. And I really sort of, and I said to him, the one curator who I admire, and museum director who I admire greatly, Harald Ziemann, this great legendary curator from Zurich, apparently, or Switzerland, he gave himself the title Ambassador of Spiritual Guestwork, and I mentioned that as sort of a little bit of an inspiration for me. And I said, I want to direct this organization from a creative place, and they said, okay, I get that, we get that, and you can have that role. And it took about 2 years for the board to really sort of see that there is something consistent and valid in this approach, the full board. And everybody, like then at some point, it was so interesting. I remember going around the room, and it was for a retreat, and sort of we asked them, like, well, what is it, before we start the retreat, let's just go around and say, what does the MCA Denver mean to you? And almost everybody used the same structure of a response. Almost everyone said, for me, it's a place that's it's serious about its art, but it's got this playful side. Or other people would say, like, you know, I like the fact that we care about international art, but yet we're still also like a place that's not pretentious. Everybody had that same duality that I was sort of talking about between excellence and awesome, which is a term that, you know, wasn't on the table at the time. But, and I was like, wow, like, they're all expressing what I've got, what I've been bringing, like, as their own personal connection to the museum. And I realized, wow, it had worked. And then there was one board member, a very generous board member, for whom it wasn't working. It never worked. And he eventually left. And I would say it was a very painful thing, because for, I think, the first year I was there, I would wake up thinking about, like, oh, am I really pissing off this one board member? And I was like pulling my punches a little bit the first year. And then at some point I said, like, you know what? I'm not doing anybody any favors. Like, I'm not like giving the museum the best that I can give if I pull my punch in this way. And so I just started to like go full on with what I do, with my approach. And you know what? And then he left. And what's amazing is that even though I was terrified of him leaving because he was generous, other people who I never like imagined coming on board came on board because they saw something in the museum that they didn't think a museum could even have. And so, and that's ultimately why, I mean, from a fundraising perspective, you know, like, I feel like we were really successful. Like, you know, the first thing I had to do was pay down $10 million of debt on the building that I inherited. And, you know, we paid down and restructured that, and then I raised $18 million on top of that, just finished that. My goal was to raise $18 million without tucking in my shirt. And again, like, that too was something where I felt like nervous about, like, well, can I really, it was a jokey way of saying, can I raise this money, you know, for endowment and capital and program expansion, while still being myself? And then I did. And so, and in fact, I think I might have even raised it precisely because I was just sort of more doing it as who I am, I think. Maybe I could have raised more if I would have put a shirt on and tucked it in. I don't know. Yeah.
So you killed your career at the museum like you purposely killed mixed taste. So, which
Yeah.
you can understand, but have you thought now about whether you want to be in an environment or maybe a non-environment, or you've given some thought about what kind of, where you would like to be next, what would be the milieu that you would like to be in? Yeah,
thanks. You know, it's really tough because no one believes me when I tell them I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I really have just a strong intuition that it's not going to be from the museum. And people are like, are you sure you weren't fired? I'm like, no. In fact, like, we're struggling right now because, like, you know, I want to stay, like, I want to leave already. And they were like, well, the search process might take a little longer than we thought. So could you stay on even just a few more months? And so yes, there is, like, the board really, like, wants me to stay. They like me, and I really like the institution. I'm actually going to stay on an extra month. But all I could say is I feel that the next thing I've got in me, I need a little bit of quiet around me for that to emerge, and I know it will emerge. And I have, like, some sense of the shape it'll take. Like, I want to stay in Denver for now. I feel like I thrive there. I feel free to invent things and create things interestingly there. I feel like the next thing will probably be something that I develop myself rather than sort of work for somebody else. I definitely want to continue doing what I've been doing. Like, the image that comes to mind is, like, when like, I don't know, it's a ridiculous image, but there's that book, like, what's the sequel to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, where the elevator, the magic elevator that goes, like, the glass elevator that goes outside the building? Like, I feel like that's what it is. Like, it feels like I was in this elevator that was going through the building, and like, okay, yeah, now it's done going through, now it's gone to all the top of the building, and now but I still want to go up. And so now I have to go outside the building. And I don't know why that came to my mind just now. But yeah, that's the way it feels to me. And so therefore, whatever I do, like, it'll probably have some elements of what I've been doing, creating a world for people to where they can see themselves. And then, that might have programs and events, probably not so much, formal exhibitions, but something like that. But probably publication, probably it might be a media platform for all of that. And in order to be able to, make a living, I probably will have to do some consulting, because I'm sure none of this is going to make any money for me at first, especially. So I'm going to have to try that. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Adam. Thanks for being so open and vulnerable with us. I mean, I think something that is interesting to end this legacy series, which our other speakers have looked kind of quite far in the past. And you've really invited us to really think about how legacy is something that also projects forward. So thanks for your vulnerability, thanks for your sincerity, and thank you all for joining us. Have a good night.